Hi everybody, this is Miss Nicole of Bloomfield Public Library, and this is my latest edition of Science Bites. And today we are going to do a topic that I love, which is static electricity. And all of us have experienced static electricity before. You might have experienced static electricity if you're walking across the floor in just socks and you go to touch something and you feel a zap. That's static electricity. Or if you're watching a summer storm and you see lightning in the sky, that's static electricity. There are endless ways that we have static electricity in our lives. And we're going to take a little look at static today and do a fun little experiment, what I like to call the floating tinsel orb. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about static electricity. All things in the world are made up of something called atoms. You may have heard that term before. And in every atom, there are electrons, which are usually indicated by a negative sign, protons, which usually have a plus sign, and neutrons, which have no charge. Electrons usually have a negative charge, protons have a positive charge, neutrons have no charge. And when things get out of balance, normally atoms are in balance. They have just as many electrons as they do protons, which means they're completely neutral in terms of a charge. But if for some reason some of those electrons are taken out of an atom, then it becomes positively charged. Or if the reverse happens, if some of the protons are taken out, it becomes negatively charged. So take as an example, you might have seen images, or this might have happened to you, of somebody brushing their hair with a comb and strands of their hair sticking up from the static. What's happening in that situation is that the comb is actually stripping the hair of electrons, and so the comb has a negative charge now if it's got electrons on it, and the atoms left behind in the hair are positively charged because now they have more protons. And as we may know from many of our other science lessons, opposites attract. So those protons are drawn to the electrons in the comb. So you can hold your comb far away from your hair and your hair is going to go towards it because it wants to reach out for those missing electrons. That's just one example. In order to create our floating tinsel orbs, we need just a few items. And the main item that I like to use is part of a PVC pipe. Now, I went to my local Ace hardware store and they have racks and racks of PVC pipes like this in the back of the store, and they're very tall. They might be 6 feet long or 7 feet long, and you can ask them to cut you down a length of PVC pipe. You don't need to buy the whole long thing, and it's not very expensive. So I asked them to make one that was, I think this is about 1.5 to 2 feet long. So I asked them to just cut me a piece, and they also sand the end for you a little bit so there aren't any rough edges. But this PVC pipe is the perfect way to create static. It loves to get staticky. You just have to find the right materials to rub on it. You can also use balloons, but I find balloons are a little trickier and they don't hold a charge as well as the PVC pipe, or as long as the PVC pipe. So it's worth the effort to go to your local hardware store. You could also do this at a Lowe's or a Home Depot, but it's worth the effort to try and get a little piece of, a little length of PVC pipe to do this. We'll also need tinsel, and this is actually the perfect time of year to get some because we're approaching the Christmas season. And I always make sure I buy some extra tinsel each year just for this kind of sciencey stuff. It's very inexpensive and you can store it for later. I stored mine in a plastic bag because tinsel gets everywhere. It sticks to you, and that is why tinsel is the perfect thing to be using for our floating orb because it loves to react to static charges. So, tinsel, PVC pipe, and now we just need things to charge our pipe. We're going to have to rub something on this to make it staticky. It might be a sweater. The sweater I'm wearing does a decent job of creating static if I rub the PVC pipe on it. It might be a wool sock. I've also read that a piece of paper can make something staticky and exchange charges. Tin foil can sometimes do that. So the experimental part of today is going to be trying to find just the right item to charge our PVC pipe. But first, we have to connect some of our tinsel strands to actually make something that will look like an orb. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. Tinsel can be difficult to work with, but we're going to do our best here. You want to pull out several strands of tinsel. And we're going to do maybe 5 or 6 strands. And it's okay that they start long. They're going to end up being shorter once we do what we need to do. So again, we want about 5 or 6 strands. Whoops. 5 or 6 strands. We're going to lay them next to each other in rows. Whoops. See, it's already sticking to me. So I've got 3, 4, 5. Whoops. And we'll do one more. 6. So now we are going to gather together the ends of our tinsel. So we're going to gather them like this. Kind of like we would do this if we had some strands of yarn and we were doing a project like this. We're going to gather them all together in one clump on one end, just like, oops, I'm missing one. There we go. It can be tricky working with tinsel, and tinsel is fragile, so you want to be a little delicate because it does like to break pretty easily. But here I've got my tinsel gathered, and I'm going to create a knot. I'm going to tie it into a knot. So I'm going to loop it through. Actually, you know what? I have a simpler way to do this. Hold on a second. We're going to lay this down, lay it back down, and I'm going to take another piece of tinsel. I just reminded myself of a simpler way to do this. We're going to lay the clump of tinsel on top of those strands, like so. And now we're going to just tie it like a regular knot. So we're going to, oops, do this. And we'll do one more for good measure. We'll make it a knot. Like so. And then we're going to do that at the other end too. So maybe about, you don't want your ball to be too long, so maybe about 6 inches, 7 inches long is good. We started off a little longer just to give ourselves room to work with here. So again, you're going to lay it on top of the tinsel, the separate strand, and we're going to tie another knot. Oops. Here we go. So we're going to loop it once through, like so, and once more, like so. And now we are actually going to take a pair of scissors and just trim some of that extra. Okay, so here's my knot. So I'm going to just trim off a good chunk of that extra. Oops. Can chunk like that. And now here's our other knot, and I'm just going to trim the extra. So now we've got our several strands tied together at each end. And when it reacts with the static electricity, remember how opposites attract, but if things are the same charge, they actually repel. So what's going to happen is these strands are suddenly going to have the same charge. They're going to pick up electrons, and they're going to want to be as far from each other as possible. So that's where we're going to get something in the shape of an orb. They're all going to separate, but they're going to be tied together at the ends. So it will look like an orb or a circle or a globe. So now that we've got our tinsel orb ready to go, we just have to charge our PVC stick. If you have a balloon, you could do your balloon too. Sometimes if you rub a balloon on your hair, it can get nice and staticky. But again, the PVC pipe is going to hold the charge better and work longer for you. So I think the first thing I'm going to try to do is charge my PVC pipe with my sweater, because I think sometimes it's worked in the past. So let's see if that works for me. Okay, I can hear static being produced when I rub it on my sweater, but I'm not getting enough of a charge to float my tinsel orb, so I think I'm going to try the socks that I'm going to give my sister's husband for Christmas. They're wool. Shh, we won't tell him that I'm using it for a static experiment. Okay, we haven't had tons of success with my sweater or the sock. They're producing static, but not enough. But I happen to know my mom's hair works really well. So she's sacrificing herself for science. So we're gonna try my mom's hair. Sorry. The beauty of science and experimenting is that you keep trying to problem solve to figure out what might be going wrong. So I had our 6-strand tinsel ball, and I was charging my PVC pipe with socks and sweater and even my mom's head, and it still wasn't working. But I have an electronically created stick that generates with a battery static, and it came with these little mylar versions of orbs that you could float. And when I charged my PVC pipe with my sweater, this floated beautifully. So I said, what could be going wrong? Why isn't the tinsel working? So what I did is I made it smaller. I did only 2 strands, and then there was enough charge on the stick to float my 2-strand tinsel orb. You might have to play with that a little bit at your house. You know, if 6 strands might work great at your house, and then it makes a really beautiful orb, and I have done that before. But sometimes your conditions are different, and those are called variables. So sometimes you have to do a little problem solving, and you might do less strands. You can even do 1 strand of tinsel just tied together so it's in a single loop, and that will float too. So play around with those different things. Try it with balloons too. If the PVC pipe doesn't work for you, maybe balloons will work better for you. But I hope you guys have some fun with this one. It's really fun once you get the knack of it, and it looks really cool when you show it off to people because it's like magic, floating something in the air above a stick. So have some fun. I won't see you again before our December holidays, so whether you celebrate Christmas or something else, I hope you just have fun staying at home, being nice and cozy, and having a good time with family. And we will definitely be back next year with more Science Bites, but until then, have some fun with some floating tinsel orbs, and call us if you need any materials at the library, and we're happy to help. So until next year, 2021, everybody have a good end of the year. Bye, everybody.